One of them took artillery fire from 300 yards away. One was struck by more than 150 bullets in 72 hours. One held the body of a murdered president. These are 15 Pennsylvania buildings that survived the Civil War. Subscribe to Zip Code Files, and let's count them down. Number 15. The Cashtown Inn in Cashtown, Adams County, Gettysburg. It was built sometime around 1797, and it was the first stagecoach stop west of Gettysburg. The first innkeeper, a man named Peter Mark, took out a tavern license in 1815 with 4 rooms to rent. Local tradition says the town got its name because Mark refused to trade in barter or credit. He wanted cash for the goods, cash for the tolls, cash for the rooms. Henry Mickley bought the building in 1854, and his son Jacob was running it when the war came down the pike. In the last days of June 1863, the Cashtown Inn became the operational center of the Confederate advance into Pennsylvania. Confederate General A.P. Hill arrived on June 29th and made the building his headquarters while he was ill. Henry Heth used it. John Imboden used it. Jacob Mickley wrote afterward that the entire rebel force under General Lee came down the Chambersburg Pike, passing within 20 feet of his barroom door. He put his losses at roughly $2,000. A wagon, a horse, a steer, 50 chickens, 100 apple trees, and 480 gallons of whiskey and brandy, gone. Heth's division marched out from Cashtown toward Gettysburg on the morning of July 1st. 3 days later, Imboden brought the wounded back past the same brick facade, a wagon train that he later described as stretching 17 miles through a downpour. The inn is a bed and breakfast today, under new ownership since 2021, and the brickwork on the front of the building is the same brickwork Lee's army marched past. Number 14. Gloria Dei, the Old Swedes Church, Philadelphia. This one predates Pennsylvania itself. Swedish colonists had settled the Delaware River Valley in the middle of the 17th century, decades before William Penn arrived, and the congregation here traces back to 1677, when a blockhouse at a place called Wicaco was converted into a place of worship. The building was constructed between 1698 and 1700 and consecrated on June 2, 1700. That makes it the oldest church in Pennsylvania and the oldest standing brick building in Philadelphia. William Penn attended the laying of the cornerstone, which makes this very likely the only surviving structure in his city that he physically set foot inside. The construction team was a mix of traditions, and that mix is visible in the walls. An English Quaker mason named Joseph Yard led the masonry. A carpenter named John Smart started the woodwork and was later replaced by John Harrison. The bricks were fired near Salem, New Jersey, and floated across by boat, then laid in Flemish bond with glazed black headers, arranged into diamond patterns across the entrance facade. The roof is steeply pitched over scissors truss framing, and that steep Scandinavian roof caused a problem almost immediately. The weight pushed the walls outward. By 1703, the congregation was adding small transept-like vestibules to the north and south sides, not for liturgy, but as buttresses to hold the building together. They worked. The tower came around 1733 and the spire before 1800. In 1703, the church hosted the first regular Lutheran ordination anywhere in the Americas. It joined the Episcopal Diocese in 1845, 16 years before the war. The churchyard has been in continuous use since the early 1700s, and Civil War soldiers are buried there alongside Revolutionary War veterans, the ornithologist Alexander Wilson, and the painter James Peale. It is still an active Episcopal parish. There are services in that building every Sunday, in a room that has been holding services since the year 1700. Number 13. The Ephrata Cloister, in Ephrata, Lancaster County. In 1732, a German pietist mystic named Johann Conrad Beissel founded a religious commune here. The members kept a Saturday Sabbath, practiced celibacy, ate no meat, and rose in the middle of the night to sing. By the early 1750s, there were roughly 80 celibate brothers and sisters in the buildings, supported by about 250 married householder members farming the land around them. Beisel is credited with composing something in the range of 1,000 original hymns, written for unaccompanied four-part voices. The community also produced Fraktur calligraphy and ran one of the earliest printing operations in the colonies. In 1749, they printed the Martyr's Mirror for the Mennonites. At 1,512 pages, it was the largest book printed in America before the Revolution. The architecture is unlike anything else in the country. It is medieval German half-timbering, called Fachwerk, with heavy oak frames and wattle and daub infill. Steep gable roofs are pierced by tiers of small dormer windows. 9 original buildings survive, including the Saron, the Sisters' House, and the Saal, the Meeting House. Inside, the doorways are deliberately low, often under 5 feet, so that anyone entering had to bow. Members slept in small cells called Kammern on narrow benches with wooden blocks for pillows. After the Battle of Brandywine in September 1777, the pacifist community opened its doors as a hospital. The popular figure repeated for decades is 500 wounded soldiers. The cloister's own history gives the more conservative number of nearly 250, of whom roughly 60 died. Typhus swept through afterward, and 2 of the buildings used as wards were later torn down to stop the spread. By the Civil War, the celibate orders had died out. The society had declined after Beisel's death in 1768. The buildings were kept up by the householder congregation, the German Seventh-day Baptists, and they stood through the war as a surviving piece of the 17th-century German world. Pennsylvania bought the site in 1941. The last resident, Marie Kackel-Bucher, died in 2008. Today, it is a state historic site run by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. You can walk the same narrow halls and duck through the same low doorways, and a resident chorus still performs Beisel's hymns on the grounds. Number 12. Carpenter's Hall at 320 Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. The lot was purchased on February 3, 1768. Construction started on February 5, 1770. The Carpenters Company first occupied the building on January 21, 1771, and it was finished in August 1774. The company itself was founded in 1724 and is the oldest surviving craft guild in America. The design came from Robert Smith, a company member, who submitted the plans but did not supervise the work. What he produced was a 2-story brick building in the shape of a Greek cross, which gives it a complicated roofline crowned by a wooden cupola. The brick is Flemish bond with glazed headers. The whole building functions as a sales pitch. A guild of master builders constructed their own headquarters to demonstrate what they could do. From September 5 to October 26, 1774, the First Continental Congress met in the ground floor East Room. Over the following decades, the building housed the Library Company of Philadelphia, the American Philosophical Society, both the first and second banks of the United States, and the Franklin Institute. During the Revolution, it served as a hospital and an arms store, and the British occupied it briefly. In 1857, 4 years before Fort Sumter, the Carpenters Company restored the hall and opened it to visitors. It was the first privately owned building in America opened to the public as a historic monument. While the country was pulling apart over the next 8 years, this building was already operating as a shrine to the moment it had come together. The Carpenters Company still owns it, 300 years after the guild was founded. It sits inside Independence National Historical Park, free to enter, and the company still meets in the building it built for itself. Number 11. The First Bank of the United States at 120 South 3rd Street in Philadelphia. Alexander Hamilton proposed it. Congress chartered it in 1791. The building went up between 1795 and 1797, and it is the oldest bank building in the country. The design is credited to Samuel Blodgett, Jr., a merchant and developer who served as superintendent of buildings in Washington. He drew on the Royal Exchange in Dublin, and the marble front was carved by the firm of Claudius Legrand and Sons. What they produced is one of the first serious pieces of neoclassical architecture in the United States. 3 stories, a 7-bay facade, a front sheathed in Pennsylvania marble, while the sides and rear stayed brick, and a 2-story portico carrying 6 Corinthian columns, roughly 30 feet tall. In the pediment above them sits a carved mahogany eagle, one of the oldest surviving uses of the national emblem in American public architecture. The 20-year charter ran out in 1811 and was not renewed. In 1812, the financier Stephen Girard bought the building and opened his own private bank inside it, and he went on to personally underwrite the federal government during the War of 1812. It was later leased to the Girard Bank, which occupied it until 1929, which means that all through the Civil War, this building was a working private bank in a city funding a war effort. The interior was rebuilt in 1901 and 1902 by James Windram, who put a 3-story glass-domed banking hall inside the old shell. After a $43 million restoration, the building reopened to the public on July 1, 2026, for the first time in generations. Number 10. The Second Bank of the United States, at 420 Chestnut Street. Congress chartered it in 1816 under Madison, after the War of 1812 made the case for a national bank all over again. Construction ran from 1819 to 1824. The architect was William Strickland, a student of Benjamin Latrobe, and in a fitting piece of professional drama, Strickland's design beat his own teacher's submission. He modeled it on the Parthenon, and the result is one of the first Greek Revival buildings in the country. 8 fluted Doric columns without bases, sitting on a raised stylobate cut from Pennsylvania blue marble. The bank's president, Nicholas Biddle, instructed that the style be purist Grecian because he wanted the building to broadcast the independence of business from government. That did not go well. Biddle's fight with Andrew Jackson became the Bank War. Jackson vetoed the recharter in 1832 and pulled federal deposits in September 1833. The charter died in 1836. The building did not. Strickland came back and redesigned it, and from the 1840s until 1935, it operated as the United States Custom House for the Port of Philadelphia. During the Civil War, this Greek temple was where the federal government collected the tariffs and duties coming off the Delaware River docks. The money that moved through this room helped pay for the Union War effort. It belongs to the National Park Service now, and the original masonry barrel vaults and marble columns are still inside. The old banking hall holds a portrait gallery of colonial and Federal-era Americans, many of them painted by Charles Willson Peale. Number 9. Pennsylvania Hospital, and specifically the Pine Building, at 8th and Spruce Streets in Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin and Dr. Thomas Bond founded it in 1751, making it the first hospital in the United States. It opened in a temporary building on High Street, now Market Street, in 1752. The permanent structure was laid out by Samuel Rhodes, a master builder and a member of that same carpenter's company, who studied Bethlehem Hospital in London and the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary before drawing his 3-part plan. The east wing went up between 1755 and 1757, the west wing between 1794 and 1797, and the center pavilion between 1794 and 1804. Together, the 3 pieces form the Pine Building. The plan is essentially a Z shape, and it was designed that way on purpose. 18th century medicine held that disease moved through stale air, so Rhodes maximized cross-ventilation and natural light in every ward. Psychiatric patients were housed in basement cells. Men were on the 2nd floor, women on the 3rd, staff and isolation cases on the top. On that top floor, under a domed glass skylight, sits the oldest surgical amphitheater in the nation, completed in 1804. There was no electric light, so surgery happened only in the brightest hours of the day, roughly 11 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Students stood in tiered rings and watched. It stayed in use until 1868, which means it was operating throughout the entire Civil War. The hospital also opened the first hospital apothecary in America in 1764 and the first medical library in 1762. During the war, records show 124 casualties brought into the wards for specialized treatment. It is still a working hospital. 515 beds, part of Penn Medicine, with patients treated inside the same Pine building today. They run free guided tours, and the 1804 amphitheater is still up there under its glass dome. Number 8. Wheatland, at 1120 Marietta Avenue in Lancaster. The house was built in 1828 for a local lawyer and bank president named William Jenkins on an estate of 156 acres that he called the Wheatlands. The architect is unknown. It is late Federal with Greek Revival influence, a central block of red brick with 2 flanking wings, 2 main floors over a basement that held the kitchen and wine cellar. The original 1828 privy and the combined smokehouse and icehouse are still standing on the grounds. Jenkins subdivided the tract in 1836. The mansion passed to his son-in-law, then in 1845 to William Morris Meredith for $6,750. In 1848, James Buchanan bought it for exactly the same figure and moved in the following year. Buchanan ran his 1856 presidential campaign from the front porch of this house, speaking to crowds standing on the lawn. He won. His single term ran from 1857 to 1861, and over those 4 years, 7 Southern states left the Union while he was still in office. He handed the crisis to Lincoln in March 1861 and came home to Lancaster. He spent the entire Civil War here. He read the newspapers in his parlor, he wrote letters, and he worked on a memoir defending his administration, published in 1866. He died in this house on June 1, 1868. His niece Harriet Lane inherited it and sold it in 1884. Wheatland opened to the public in 1936, was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1961, and is run today by Lancaster History. The interior is one of the better preserved snapshots of upper-class antebellum taste anywhere in the state. Number 7. Eastern State Penitentiary at 2027 Fairmount Avenue in Philadelphia. 11 acres of it. Construction began in 1822 on a former cherry orchard. It opened in 1829 at a cost of around $780,000, which made it the most expensive public building in the United States at the time. The design came from John Haviland, a British-born architect who beat out William Strickland for the commission. The exterior is Gothic Revival, deliberately built to look like a medieval fortress, with crenellated stone walls facing the neighborhood. Behind that face, Haviland laid out something entirely new. A central rotunda with 7 cell blocks radiating outward like spokes on a wheel, so that a small number of guards could observe every corridor from one point. Each cell had a barrel-vaulted ceiling and a single skylight, which the institution's language later turned into the Eye of God. Each cell also had central heating, running water, and a flush toilet, systems that went in before the White House had comparable plumbing. The technical achievement is documented. The head-to-head comparison is a talking point. The idea came from the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, founded in 1787 and shaped by Quaker reformers and Benjamin Rush. They wanted to replace corporal punishment with reflection, and they coined the word penitentiary to describe it. In practice, it meant total isolation, a regime known internationally as the Pennsylvania system. Charles Dickens toured the prison in 1842 and wrote it up in American Notes. He called the system cruel and wrong and described it as rigid, strict, and hopeless solitary confinement. The model was copied by more than 300 prisons around the world. The separate system was abandoned in 1913 as overcrowding made it impossible. A building designed for roughly 250 inmates held about 1,700 by 1926. It closed in 1971. It is a museum now, deliberately preserved as a ruin rather than restored. The cell blocks are open to the public with the peeling paint and collapsed roofs left in place, and it runs a large haunted attraction every October to fund the preservation work. Number 6. The Lydia Leister House on Taneytown Road at Hunt Avenue, on the back slope of Cemetery Ridge, just south of Gettysburg. Lydia Leister was a widow. Her husband James had died in 1859, and in 1861 she bought a 2-room wood frame house and about 9 acres for $900. It is a story and a half, built of red oak planks under a shake roof, whitewashed, with 2 rooms and a loft. There is no ornament on it anywhere. It is a working farm cottage. On July 2, 1863, George Meade made it the headquarters of the Army of the Potomac because the reverse slope shielded it from direct fire while the crest gave him his view. That evening, he held a council of war in the front room with roughly 12 senior generals, and they voted to hold the position. The next afternoon, Confederate artillery opened the bombardment before Pickett's charge. The gunners consistently overshot the Union line on the crest, which put every long round directly into the reverse slope where the house sat. Meade's son, Captain George Meade, Jr., recorded shells bursting among the staff horses, the front steps torn away, the porch supports carried off, and one solid shot that barely grazed the commanding general as he stood in the open doorway. Meade moved to a nearby barn, then to Powers Hill. Leister came back to trampled crops, burned fences, a spring fouled by dead horses, and her best peach tree killed by the fires the soldiers had built under it. She counted 17 dead horses on her land. In 1865, she told the journalist John Trowbridge what she had gotten for all of it. She sold the bones of the horses at 50 cents per 100 pounds, about 750 pounds of bone. A few dollars, total. She received no government compensation and rebuilt the farm on her own labor, lived there until 1888, and died in December 1893. The house belongs to Gettysburg National Military Park now. It is not open for tours, but it sits right beside the road on the auto route, whitewashed and unchanged, and roughly 1 million people drive past it every year. Number 5. The Shriver House at 309 Baltimore Street in Gettysburg. George Washington Shriver built it in 1860 when he was 23, and it was designed to make money. Red brick, 4 levels, vernacular Greek revival, with a saloon in the cellar and a 10-pin bowling alley out the back. Shriver's saloon and 10-pin alley was supposed to be the family's future. He enlisted in Cole's cavalry in August 1861, before the business ever really opened. That left his wife Henrietta, called Hetty, and their daughters Sadie and Molly, aged 7 and 5, in the summer of 1863. When the fighting started, Hetty took the girls and a neighbor's child and walked 3 miles south to her parents' farm, which put them close to the heaviest fighting of the second day. Behind her, Confederate troops moved into the empty house. A neighbor, James Pierce, reported seeing sharpshooters up in the attic. The soldiers went through the food and the liquor and built a barricade across the street out of the family's furniture. The house was restored starting in 1996, and the restoration is the reason we know as much as we do. Workers pulled up floorboards and opened walls and found spent and unspent Confederate ammunition, Union bullets embedded in the garret brickwork, medical equipment under the floor, and a child's shoe sealed inside a wall. Museum accounts say at least 2 Confederate soldiers died in that attic. A local guide account puts it at 1 and possibly 2, so treat that as tradition rather than a count. George Shriver never came back. He was captured, sent to Camp Sumter in Georgia, the prison better known as Andersonville, and died there of starvation and scurvy in 1864. Sources disagree on whether it was August or December. Hetty sold the house on April 1, 1866, for $2,100 and remarried that July. It operates today as the Shriver House Museum, restored to look the way it did in June 1863. It is one of the few sites at Gettysburg that tells the battle entirely from the civilian side, and you can go up into the attic where the sharpshooters were. Number 4. Schmucker Hall at 61 Seminary Ridge, on the high ground west of Gettysburg. The Lutheran Theological Seminary opened in 1826 with 11 students. This building, its main hall, was dedicated in 1832, and it served as the seminary's primary structure until 1895 and as a dormitory until 1951. It is 4 stories of brick with a white wooden cupola on top. The name comes from Samuel Simon Schmucker, the seminary's founder and an outspoken abolitionist theologian. When the Confederate Army arrived, troops ransacked his nearby home. Schmucker himself had already left town to avoid capture. On the morning of July 1, 1863, that cupola became the most useful piece of real estate in Pennsylvania. It is the highest fixed vantage point west of the town, and Union cavalry used it to watch the Confederate columns coming in. Tradition holds that John Buford climbed it personally and met John Reynolds there, and that scene was made famous by the novel The Killer Angels and the film Gettysburg. Licensed battlefield guides and Adams County historians have raised real questions about those specific details. The observation use is solid. The staging is less certain. By that afternoon, the Union line west of town had collapsed, and the building was behind Confederate lines. It became one of the largest field hospitals of the battle. The seminary's figure is more than 600 wounded from both armies treated there through September. Another well-sourced account puts it at almost 700 patients, with roughly 70 deaths in the building. The last patient left on September 16, 1863. Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland of the 151st Pennsylvania, shot through both legs, stayed until September. Colonel Robert Cummins of the 142nd Pennsylvania died in a first-floor room. Confederate Generals Isaac Trimble and James Kemper were carried in. Artillery fire tore away part of the northeast corner and opened a crack running nearly 2 stories. The building was nearly demolished in the 1950s. It was rehabilitated between 2006 and 2013 and opened as the Seminary Ridge Museum on July 1, 2013, exactly 150 years after Buford's men went up the stairs. Visitors can climb into the cupola on a timed ticket and look out at the same ground. Number 3. The Jenny Wade House on Baltimore Street in Gettysburg. The museum address is 548. The period record and the historic photographs use 528. It was built around 1832 as a brick duplex, working-class housing in a simplified federal style, with 2 mirrored halves under one roof. In July 1863, the north half belonged to Georgia Anna Wade McClellan, whose husband, John Lewis McClellan, was a wheelwright away in Union service. The south half belonged to the Isaac Newton McLean family. Georgia had given birth days before the battle. Her 20-year-old sister, Mary Virginia Wade, called Jenny or Ginny, came over with their mother to help. The house sat between the Union position on Cemetery Hill and Confederate troops in the town. For 3 days, it was in the middle of the exchange. More than 150 bullets struck the building. An artillery shell came through the roof and lodged there without exploding, and stayed lodged for roughly 15 years. On the morning of July 3, Jenny Wade was standing in the kitchen kneading dough. A single mini-ball came through 2 closed wooden doors and killed her. She was the only civilian killed directly by the fighting at Gettysburg, in a battle that produced 50,000 military casualties over 3 days. Her body was taken to the cellar, then buried temporarily in the yard in a coffin reportedly built for the Confederate General William Barksdale. She was reburied in January 1864 and finally interred at Evergreen Cemetery. In 1882, the Senate granted her mother a pension. The house has been a museum since 1901, and it is one of the most visited buildings in Gettysburg. The 2 doors the bullet passed through are still there, and you can look through the hole it made. Number 2. The Dobbin House at 89 Steinwehr Avenue in Gettysburg, the oldest standing structure in the town by more than 50 years. The Reverend Alexander Dobbin was born in Londonderry, Ireland, in 1742, educated in Glasgow, and came to Pennsylvania as a Reformed Presbyterian minister. He bought 300 acres in 1774 and finished this house in 1776, the same summer the Declaration was being signed in Philadelphia. It is a two-story fieldstone farmhouse, built from stone pulled off the surrounding property, with walls roughly 2 feet thick and 7 fireplaces. Much of the 1776 fabric is still in place. Dobbin ran a classical and theological school out of the building for about 25 years, described as the first classical school west of the Susquehanna River. He and his 2 wives raised a combined household, often counted at 19 children, 10 of his own and 9 stepchildren. He died in 1809. The house is frequently described as an underground railroad station with a hidden crawl space behind a sliding panel. That claim rests on oral tradition, and the National Register file notes it has not been substantiated. Evidence-based research on Adams County's Underground Railroad centers on McAllister's Mill, Yellow Hill, and the Slaves' Refuge Society at St. Paul's AME Church. There is also a date problem. The site puts the hidden panel at 1810, and Alexander Dobbin died in 1809. What is documented is July 1863. The Dobbin family had been gone for decades by then. After the first day's fighting pushed the Union Army back through town, the house was taken over as a field hospital and treated wounded from both armies, while still sitting inside the range of the guns. It runs as a restaurant and tavern today, and people eat dinner on floorboards that are 250 years old. Number 1. Independence Hall, 520 Chestnut Street, Philadelphia. It was built between 1732 and 1753 as the Pennsylvania State House. The design is usually handed to Andrew Hamilton, but modern scholarship gives it to Edmund Woolley, a master carpenter and Carpenters' Company member. There is a surviving 1735 receipt recording a payment of £5 to Woolley for drawing drafts. It is Georgian, red brick in Flemish bond, with marble belt courses and a wooden tower. The original steeple came down in 1781, and the one standing now was designed by William Strickland in 1828. The Declaration of Independence was adopted in the Assembly Room in 1776. The Constitution was written in the same room in 1787. On February 22, 1861, Washington's birthday, President-elect Abraham Lincoln stopped here on his way to Washington. He spoke in the Assembly Room, then went outside and raised a 34-star flag marking the admission of Kansas. Standing in that room, he said he would rather be assassinated on that spot than surrender the principles of the Declaration of Independence. 4 years and 2 months later, on April 22, 1865, his coffin came back to the same room and lay in state for about 20 hours. Roughly 85,000 people lined the streets for the procession. Estimates of the number who filed past the body inside range from nearly 100,000 to over 300,000. The room where the country was created is the room where the man who kept it together was laid out. Same floor, same walls, 89 years apart. The National Park Service runs it now, and it has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1979. Admission is free, you need a timed ticket most of the year, and a ranger walks you into the assembly room in groups of about 30. If you want more of these, subscribe to Zip Code Files and tell me in the comments which building you would want to walk through first.